Ready? Okay. Morning, everyone. Parshas Chayei, that's 106 in the article. So, it's an interesting Parsha. It's called Chayei, the life of Sarah, containing lots of things actually that happened after the life of Sarah, which is the burial of Sarah, the death of Sarah and burial of Sarah, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka that happened after she passed away, and towards the end of the Parsha, Avraham Avinu remarries Keturah, and then ends up sending the children of his wife and the children of Ishmael away to the east, as it says. Just as a general introduction, so all of these things are interesting because the Parsha is called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, and yet all these things really are about post-life of Sarah, what happened after her life. And I think it's a concept we mentioned before, but it's got to do with the concept that it emphasizes the true life of someone. The true life of someone is not the existence of someone, but it's more what we achieve in terms of values and spirituality in the world, our mitzvahs, our legacy, our things that we make a difference to. That's the real life, that's the real true life of who we are. And that's reflected sometimes way after a person no longer even physically exists. In the case of Sarah, we know one of the ideas of Sarah is that she was exclusively the mother of the Jewish nation. More in a way, more than Avraham was the father of the Jewish nation. Because, why I say that is because Avraham was the father of the Jewish nation, but he was actually also the father of other nations. Because he had Ishmael, right? Ishmael's, right? It was Sarah who channeled the exclusivity, so to speak, and the choosing, the concept of Yitzchak being the specific and exclusive heir of Avraham that created that line and created that uniqueness of Am Yisrael. So that's reflected in the Parsha in different ways. First of all, the fact that she was buried in Ma'aras Machpelah. She was the first one out of the matriarchs and matriarchs who buried there, which highlighted the exclusive connection that the Yidden have with Eretz Yisrael. The fact that Avraham went and he actually bought the land of Ma'aras Machpelah for the burial of Sarah. That was an amazing thing itself because Avraham really was promised the whole land. He was entitled to the land. Hashem had promised him and he sent us the land of Israel, but yet this was one of the parts of the land that were exclusively bought. I've mentioned many times that there were 3 parts of Eretz Yisrael that were bought, and those are the 3 most contested places in Eretz Yisrael, which is bizarre. Eretz Machpelah, Shechem, and the Temple Mount. Those 3 areas were not just conquered by the Jewish people or given to the Jewish people, they were bought by the Jewish people. And yet it's the most contested places, which is strange. Although not strange maybe, however you want to look at it. And also the whole concept of her specific connection to Yitzchak, the marriage of Yitzchak, which was really the continuation of Am Yisrael, which again was connected to the essence of who Sarah was, and also the end of the Parsha. The end of the Parsha is a very interesting part of the Parsha. We never gone into it. Maybe we should go into it one time, not now. But it's Avraham Avinu having other children from Hagar, including Ishmael, and then sending them away, giving them presents, providing for them, but yet distancing himself from them and distancing them from him. In other words, the end, they didn't become part of the family. It's only Yitzchak who was really the continuation of Avraham, which really has more to do with Sarah than Avraham, which again is why it's in this week's Parsha. Okay.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
Why was Hagar's name changed to Keturah?
Because she actually became righteous, and she was righteous, and it says that her deeds were as special as Keturah, which is incense, beautiful incense. The very fact that she wanted to reconnect to Avraham, so she wasn't a bad person. Nor was Ishmael at the end of his life, funnily enough. Ishmael did tshuva, right? Which is interesting. Okay. So let's have a look at we're going to go into something specific, but I want to have a look at a little bit of the beginning of the Parsha. So page 106. The Chumash says, the life of Sarah was 100 years. Esrim Shana, 20 years. The Sheva Shanim, 7 years. Shnei Chayei Sarah, these are the life of Sarah. But Thomas Sarah passed away Kiryas Arba, in a place called Kiryas Arba. He Chevron, which is the same city as Hebron, Not to be confused with modern day cities. In other words, today, Hebron and Kiryas Arba are actually two separate locations, right? The main Jewish community, I mean, our people live in Hebron proper, but the bulk of the Jewish community that live in Hebron today don't live in Hebron. They live in a place which they call Kiryat Arba, where Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the burial site of Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, is actually in Hebron. That's real Hebron. However, that actually is Kiryat Arba, and biblically that's the same place. Kiryat Arba is Hebron, right? Why is it called Kiryat Arba? Because there were 4 couples that were buried there. There were 4 giants that lived there, and so on. So Be'eretz Canaan, this was the land of Canaan. Vayova Avraham came. Lispoid LeSarah, he came to eulogize Sarah, Velivkoisa, and to cry for her. I saw a little cute little word. What does it mean? Vayovois Avraham came. What does it mean he came? Right? The Medrash says, and where did he come? It says the Medrash, Mahar HaMoiriah, he came from the Temple Mount, Har HaMoriah. Why was he there? So we know the story of the death of Sarah is connected to the Akedah, which was the end of last week's Parsha. Right? The end of the Akedah was the end of Parsha Vayera is the Akedah, and the Medrash says Avraham Avinu didn't actually tell Sarah that he was taking Yitzchak to the Akedah, didn't want to frighten her, but when she heard about it, she passed away. Right? That's a whole side analysis of why she passed away was the issue, but this is what happened. So when Avraham Avinu came to eulogize her, it says, where did he come from? So the Medrash says, he came from Har HaMoriah. What does that mean? So I saw a little vert that it says that when you eulogize someone, you want to be able to say the greatness of the person, right? So Avraham Avinu mentioned the Akedah. In other words, this was the greatness of Sarah, that she raised a child like Yitzchak, that was ready to put himself on the Akedah, right? We mentioned this last week, that, okay, we attribute it more to Avraham than to Yitzchak, but still Yitzchak was great. I mean, the fact that he was ready to go along with it, even though he realized it was going to be him, and he didn't run away. And this was part of Sarah's education, that she put so much into him that he was ready to give himself up for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is what the Medrash means, Meheichon bo, where did Avraham Avinu come from? In other words, not come from physically, where was his context? Where was he coming from intellectually in terms of his eulogy? Mahar HaMoriah from the Temple Mount. In other words, the story of the Akedah. That's what he used when he came to eulogize her. That's what the Medrash means, that he came to eulogize her. Where did he come from? He came from Har HaMoriah. Okay. Now, I want to share with you an idea, but before I do that, I'm just going to share with you a general idea, just something I saw to do with the Parsha that comes from the Mea Shiloach, the Ishbitzer. I warned you this year, you're going to hear a lot from him. So, he has a very interesting piece, but I just saw it fascinating in its own right. He connects it to the Parsha. I have to be honest, I don't thoroughly understand how all the connections that he makes. So I'll share it with you how I understand it, but I'm sharing with you because the concept is fascinating. And he starts off with a Gemara it's a general concept about the whole Parsha. He starts off with a Gemara in Brachas, based on a pasuk. The pasuk says, it's a pasuk in Mishlei, I think it is. Right? The pasuk says, "Al zois yispalel adam kol chasid la'es mitzvah." That it says regarding this, al zois, regarding this, says the pasuk, let every devout man pray to you at the time when he needs to find this. That's what the pasuk says. It's a very cryptic pasuk, right? In other words, that a person should pray in a moment of need, and he'll find that Hashem will supply him with what he needs at that time, right? Says the Gemara, what is this la'es mitzvah? What does it mean he should daven at the time when he needs to find something? What is this special time that a person needs to daven for? So there's a number of opinions. And it's a Gemara which we call Agadata. Agadata means it's like the allegoric part of the Gemara, where often the Gemara talks very cryptically. We need to sort of decode what the Gemara is actually referring to. So one thing the Gemara says, La'es mitzvah isha, means when a person marries. That needs a special prayer. Okay, we understand. A person has to pray to be able to find the right relationship, and it should stay the right relationship, and so on and so forth. The next opinion, Rabbi Nosson says in the Gemara, La'es mitzvah means Torah. Right? A third one says, La'es mitzvah actually means death. Death. Which, simply read in the Gemara, a person should pray for an easy death. It says everyone's going to die eventually, so it just depends how a person dies. So therefore, a person should pray that it should be painlessly or as easy as possible. And then another opinion says in the Gemara, Zukfura, it actually refers to burial. That the burial should be in a smooth way, I guess more spiritually speaking. It should be comforting or strengthening for the neshama or something. And then Mar Zutra says, the last opinion says, now you have to understand the context of this. It says, La'es mitzoy zebeis hakisei. This it refers to davening to Hashem to live, this is the simple pshat of the Gemara, to live in the vicinity of a bathroom, of a what do they call it? A place to relieve yourself, right? Now, this was a big deal in the Gemara, you have to understand. We take it for granted nowadays, but the Gemara has another way, somewhere else the Gemara says a fascinating thing. The Gemara says, Eizuhu Asher, who's a wealthy person, who has a bathroom next to his table. He doesn't have to go in the fields and dig things and right. In those days it was a big issue, right? Nowadays that's not a sign of wealth, right? And I say nowadays, it's especially nowadays. In other words, not so long ago there was times people at least had public ones in the yard somewhere that a few houses shared, but not today anymore, right? Or at least not in developed country. Sorry? In non-Western society, correct. Right. But it's a very big issue. So the Ishbitzer tackles this Gemara and explains what does all this mean. What is it? And by the way, the Gemara says that the main shot is the last one. Right? Like the main tefillah is the Beis HaKisei, which is really strange, right? So he says like this. He says, what the Gemara actually means is like this. And I'm reading into a little bit what he says, but I think this is what he's trying to say. That we know that certain physical things that we have are out of our hands completely, right? What happens to us physically, Hakol b'dei Shemaim, everything's in the hands of heaven and so on. Then on the other hand, we have Bechira, we have free choice. In other words, we have free choice of our spiritual responses, our moral responses. Whether we do a mitzvah, we don't do the mitzvah, that's not something you daven for, that's something you have to do. Having said that, we do actually daven to Hashem to help us do the mitzvahs and to help us learn Torah, but primarily that doesn't apply to it's not tefillah is not the main thing. The main thing is to get the job done, to actually do it, learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Right? Then there are things that a person involves himself in. He does, in other words, he's got to do it himself, but it's not completely in his control. And that's the time that we call out to our Kadosh Baruch Hu to help us stay on the right path. We're going to do what we can, but to help us stay in the right way. And he says, what does that mean? He says, first of all, Isha, relationships, okay, we understand. A person looks for the right relationship, you do your homework, you do your due diligence, you find compatibility, you find common values, and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's not completely in our hands, right? There's stuff that we can do, but we need a lot of siyata d'ishmai, need a lot of help from heaven in order to do that. The Gemara says, therefore, that's something you have to daven for. Right? The other thing is death and burial. So he quotes an interesting Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest Tanoim. Right? The greatest Tanoim in the Gemara, when it came time for him to pass on from this world, he was surrounded by his students, and he started to cry. And they said, why are you crying? Someone who lived a life like you lived, which was so righteous and so pious and so definitely qualifying for the world to come, you're nothing to be afraid about. I mean, you're fine, right? So he said, Eineni yodeya be'ezei derech moilichin oisi. I'm crying because as I pass on, I don't know which road I'm going to be taken down. I don't know if I'm really qualifying or not. Which obviously is a very, very strange thing, and all the commentaries ask the question, and he brings it, and that's why he says that's why one has to daven for that. And he doesn't explain it, he only says it very briefly, but I just want to share with you an explanation that I saw, which I think is what he's trying to say, is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying, yes, I know. I know that I lived my life with Torah mitzvahs. And the Gemara says fascinating stories about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, about the type of pious person that he actually was. But, he says, a person never knows what's really happening in his subconscious. I don't know where I really am. Am I really connected through and through? Is my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu something that permeates me on all levels? And he self-doubted, obviously partly had to do with humility, but nevertheless it's a concept which is very fascinating. That sometimes we're very passionate about something, we're very gung-ho about something, we're learning and we're davening and we're doing mitzvahs, but are we really there on all levels? If we were really tested on the deepest levels of Anashama, would we pass? Would we be able to say that we're there on every level, right? So I think that's what the Ishbitz is saying. That's something that the person has to daven for. Missa, when we pass away, and burial, is it something that we can confidently say that we're leaving this world, not only with the connection to Hashem on a conscious level, but that we're fully there on a subconscious level. Not completely in our control, but we hope we get there, right? The other thing he says is that the Gemara says you have to daven for Torah. What does it mean you daven for Torah? And he says a very, very important concept. What does it mean as a person has daven for Torah? So learning Torah is not something we daven, Hashem should help us learn Torah, but learning Torah is something we have to do ourselves. The keeping of mitzvahs we have to do ourselves. But then he says there's the grey areas. In other words, there's decisions that we make in life which are not clear-cut. Right? In other words, person is faced with the dilemma, should he eat this or not eat this? Well, it's a question. Is it kosher or not kosher? That's not a question, right? So you don't need you need your free choice for that. You don't need, you need help from heaven for everything, but it's not like that's not right. But then there's many, many decisions that we make in life where we might talk ourselves into that it's the way of the Torah, and not necessarily it is. Right? And that's a lot of stuff that happens in us. The decisions that we make, the things we do or say to other people, the things that we take action with or we don't take action, or we stand up or we don't stand up, there's a lot of grey area involved. And it's not always easy to align ourselves with what the Torah really wants us to do. That takes a lot of effort. Right? And for that you need to daven. You need to ask Hashem. The other things you need to do also, like talk to other people, and like Pirkei Avos says, have a mentor and so on, but for that you have to daven. That's what the Gemara means. It says that one of the things a person has to daven, that you have to daven for Torah. You have to daven that anything you do, the decisions you make, should be without subjectivity and without bias, should really be consistent with Torah values. That's what it means to daven for Torah. That's what he learns. And then he says, the last thing the Gemara says is Beis HaKisei. He says, what is that? So here's the interesting thing. He says that's a very important need of a person, not physically necessarily. So he associates it symbolically with the concept of dignity and shame, right? The concept of finding a facility, a Beis HaKisei, on a physical level is really to be private, to be dignified, and to be able to do whatever one needs to do in a dignified way. So he says what that symbolizes generally is the concept of self-dignity and the dignity that we give to ourselves and to our life, right? Because like we know, he doesn't say this, but we know from the Gemara that one of the worst things possible that can happen to a person is that his or her dignity should be compromised. Called kavod abrius. We know this from lots of different Gemaras. We know that the Gemara says sometimes we're permitted to transgress in very limited circumstances, but we limit to transgress an avera in order to avoid embarrassment and compromise of dignity. Right? We know that the Gemara says that when you humiliate someone else, in other words, when you compromise someone else's dignity, it's tantamount to murder. It's like murdering someone. Right? That's an amazing thing. That just shows us how bad it is for a person's dignity to be compromised. So although we can act, and we can try ourselves act in a dignified way to make sure that we don't suffer humiliation and we don't compromise our own dignity, but it's not always in our hands. And that's something that needs davening. That needs a lot of davening to Hashem, that we shouldn't come to a situation where our dignity is compromised. Right? So it's a very interesting take on the Gemara that talks about these 5 things we're supposed to daven for. So what's it got to do with Parshas Chayei? So here's the hard part. He says that in Parshas Chayei, all of these things are hinted. Right? He says, for number 1, Torah. He says Torah is, I'm not going to the right order necessarily. Torah is hinted just before the story of the shidduch between Yitzchak and Rivka. It says, Va'avram zokein bo bayom. Avram was an elder coming with his days. The word zokein we know in Torah can mean old, but actually zokein in the Torah normally applies to someone who's scholarly, someone who's learned, right? Because the word zokein, the Gemara says, it refers to someone zeh shekono chochma, a person that has acquired wisdom. Right? We know this in the pasuk later on in the Chumash and Parshas Kedoshim, where it says that you should get up for an older person, or that you stand up for an older person. So there's 2 expressions there in the pasuk. It says v'hodarta pnei zoken, you should honor a zoken, and mipnei seva tokum, you should get up in front of a seva. That could both be translated as being an old person, but it's not. Seva means an elderly person, whether they're scholarly or not. Zoken actually is not referring to an elderly person. Zoken is referring to a wise person, a person who's scholarly. So therefore Zokin refers to Torah, that's Torah hinted in Parshas Chayei. Davening for a relationship, the whole Chayei, most of it is about the shidduch between Yitzchak and Rivka. Death and burial, of course, is the very beginning of the Parsha. Sarah passes away, Sarah was buried. And then the part that on Mamashket is, he says at the end of the Parsha, you have the part of the children of Yishmael, and Avram Avinu sending him away. And he says that everything of that has to do with Avram Avinu's own dignity. The fact that he had to send them away, the fact that he distanced himself from them. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that, but I guess it's the blemish on Avraham, so to speak, or the lack of dignity of Avraham was Yishmael and his children, or his descendants, and something like that. So that's how these things come into the Parsha. I thought I'd share with you because just without connection to the Parsha, the actual interpretation of the Gemara itself is a very fascinating interpretation. Okay. Now, I want to just share with you a general idea, which has to do with the Parsha in general, or actually with the life of Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, but it's primarily focused on the story of the Shidduch and Yitzchak and Rivka. Right? Now, what I'm going to share with you is based on three things. It's based on a challenge of three things. It's based on an essay from the Sochat Shavah, the Shem Shmuel. I mention him sometimes. It's also based on a diary entry. I don't know if I ever told you this, but after the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, they found in his drawer two very thick notebooks of diary entries that he had made. A lot of it was very deep Torah thoughts that he never said. He never said publicly. It's something that he meant, he was going to say, he planned to say, or whatever the case was. And it was fascinating because notwithstanding the vast amount of learning that he left in terms of his published works and so on, this was a whole new thing after he passed away. It was all subsequently all published with decoding it, because actually it was written very, very cryptically and very briefly. And there was a whole team of a whole team of people that actually worked on it to properly explain it and decode it and so on and so forth. My father-in-law, Allah Shalom, was one of the people that worked on it. I'm mentioning his yahrzeit was yesterday, so he actually was one of the people that worked on those Rishimas, not the diary entry. So one of the diary entries is a whole explanation of this week's Parsha. Now, parts of it are connected to things that he spoke about elsewhere, but this particular perspective is something that only appears in the diary entry. And I'm going to explain part of it by using a discourse that he once said in 1981 about the whole thing of the Yitzchak and Rivka story. So let's have a look at some of the Pesukim first, and then we'll go there. Okay. So, go to page... Well, there's a few things. Okay, let's first have a look at page 108. 108 at the bottom. Just to see a little bit in the Pesukim. So, Avram, the beginning of chapter 24. Avram, Zokin, Baba Yomim, Avram was elder, he was coming with his days. Hashem, Berech, Avram, Michoel, Hashem had blessed Avram with everything. Vayomer Avram, Al Avda, Avram said to his servants, this is Kan Beisoy, Moishel B'chol Asheloi, his manager. Simno, Elias, in other words, Simno Yotchotach Zerechi, place your hand under my thigh. Ve'ashbiacho, Ba'Hashem Elokei Hashmayim, I'm going to make you swear by the God of the heaven, Ve'elokei Oretz. Do not take a girl for my son from the Canaanite daughters. You have to go out of Israel and go to Haran and take from my family and take a wife for my sons. Okay, so he goes and he travels and he takes 10 camels and the whole thing. Now, then he comes to the well and he davens. One person won't have a look. Just go to page 112. He comes to the well and he davens to Hashem. He says, I'm going to make a sign that the girl that comes out and I ask her to give me a drink of water, and she says, let me give you to drink and also your camels. That's the one that you've chosen for Yitzchak, and that's what happened with the whole story of Rivka. Then the pasuk says, interesting, and bear this pasuk in mind because we'll come back to it. The first pasuk on the page, pasuk 15, Tesvav. It says, "Va'ayihu terem kilo ledaber." before he finished speaking to God. V'hinei Rivka comes out. Who was Rivka? The pasuk is very emphatic in telling us who Rivka was. Asher Yulda li Besuel, she was born to Besuel ben Milka. Eishes Nachar, who was the wife of Nachar. Achi Avram, who was the brother of Avram. V'chador al Shikma, and she had a jug on her shoulder. And then the whole story unfolds, and so on and so forth. Then he gives her jewelry, the whole thing. Then he takes her back to Yitzchak. Just skip a little bit to the page 120. He brings her back to Yitzchak, and have a look at pasuk Samach Zayin 67 on page 120. It says the pasuk Vayivi'eha Yitzchak ha'ehela Sarah imoy. Yitzchak brings her to the tent of Sarah. Vayikach es Rivka, and he took Rivka vatilo leisha, and she became his wife. Yitzchak became Yitzchak's wife. Vaye'aveh, and he loved her. Vayinochem Yitzchak acharei imoy, and Yitzchak became comforted after his mother. Why did he become comforted after his mother? So the Medrash tells us like this. The Medrash says that what happened was that Sarah's tent was a very special tent. Sarah's tent was a tent that 3 miracles took place at Sarah's tent. There was a cloud over her tent always. Neir doluk me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos. There was a candle that burned from erev Shabbos to erev Shabbos. There was a miracle. And bracha mitzuyo be'isra, there was a special bracha, a special blessing that was in the dough. That you ate a little bit, you became satisfied, the bread remained fresh, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's the story. Now, we know that what I'm going to share with you is obviously based on the principle that two principles. One principle is Maisa Avoy Siman Lebanim. Whatever happened to our forefathers is paving the way for what's going to happen to the children. The story of the forefathers is the story of Jewish history. Not history in the past, but history in the future, right? And therefore that's important because we need to learn from the stories of Yitzchak and of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In this week's Parsha, it comes with tremendous emphasis. Why? Because there's a very, very problematic issue in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha tells us about the shidduch between Yitzchak and Rivka, right? Now we didn't learn all the psukim, but this story is told in phenomenal detail. Phenomenal detail. So much so that the Gemara wonders about this. Chazal wonder about it. They say it's quite a strange thing that many halachas, many important laws of the Torah are taught to us by one word, one nuance sometimes, one letter, which we have volumes of the oral Torah trying to decode and decipher what the halacha is all about. Why? Because the Torah is Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah, and the Torah is very concise, and Hashem doesn't use one extra word when it comes to the Chumash. And suddenly the story of Yitzchak and Rivka is boom, pages and pages. In fact, it's a repeated story. It's told in tremendous detail, number one, and it's told twice. Because if you look in the whole Parsha, you'll see Eliezer, we hear the story. Eliezer comes to the well and he makes a deal with Hashem, and he tells what he's going to ask the girl, and she gives him to drink, and she offers the camels, and the whole thing, right? Then he actually goes to Rivka's house and he meets Besuel and Lava, and he tells the whole story again. Now, I don't doubt that he told them the whole story, but the Chumash says he tells them the whole story, and the Chumash goes through the whole story again. And it says that he told Besuel and Rivka that I left my father's house today, my master's house, and I came to the well, and I needed the wife for Yitzchak, and I made a deal with Hashem. And he goes, and we read the whole thing. All the Chumash needed to say was, Eliezer told Lavan and Besuel everything that had happened to him. That's all we need to say. One verse. Doesn't say that. Again, detail after detail after detail. Right? Huge detail. To the point where on a simple level, the Gemara says, we see that Yofeh Sicha shel Avdei Bata Ava is that the conversation of the servants of the patriarch seems to be more precious than the Torah of the children. The Torah of the children, we have one letter teaching us volumes of halacha, whereas the conversation of the servant, not only the forefathers themselves, but the servant of the forefathers, is in such detail, right? But obviously the question is, what does that mean? Why? Right? So what we're going to see is that this story of Yitzchak and Rivka is told in great detail because it's not a story of a shidduch. I mean, it is a story of a shidduch, but it's not just a story of a shidduch. It's the story of the whole goal and destination of the Jewish people. Right? That's why it's told in such detail. So let's try and develop that a little bit. So first of all, let me start with the simple thing that the Sochot Shavah says. He says, you can see this already from the fact, the very last part of the story, that Yitzchak brings Rivka into the tent and these 3 miracles happened. Right? He says the 3 miracles that happened in Sarah's tent wasn't just miracles that happened in Sarah's tent that again happened with Rivka's tent. It's the 3 essential concepts that is the foundation of every home. Coming from what? Where do we see this? We see this in the Mishkan. When the Yidden eventually became a nation, they received the Torah HaSinai. Subsequent to that, Hashem commands them to make a Mishkan. He doesn't spell this out in this detail, but we know the concept of building the Mishkan is not just the Mishkan's a model. As we know from the Pasuk, V'asu limigdosh shechanti b'soichem, Hashem says, you shall make for me a sanctuary, I will dwell among them. I've said this to you many times, what this means. It doesn't say I will dwell in it says I will dwell in them, which means I will dwell amongst every single person. So we look to the Mishkan to see a model of what is it that we're supposed to do. What happened in the Mishkan, says the Sochot Shavah, a very interesting thing. He says, in the Mishkan we find, the Mishkan specifically, we find a couple of miracles. One was that the menorah used to be kindled every day. Okay? And Chazal tell us that the Neir HaMa'aravi, it was kindled every day in the following way. It was kindled every afternoon and it burnt all night. Now that wasn't a miracle, there was enough oil to burn all night. Right? Each one of the cups had the same amount of oil. In fact, the Gemara says that there was enough oil went in there to burn through the long nights of Teves. Teves is the winter month of the northern hemisphere. Okay, the longest nights. That's fine. However, it says, how we learn that there was a miracle that happened. The Neir HaMa'aravi, the western candle. By the way, there's a whole machlokes about what that means, the western candle. But anyway, whatever it is, one of the candles of the menorah burned for 24 hours. To burn constantly. First miracle. Second miracle we know from the Mishkan, Lechem Haponim. The breads that went on the table. There were 12 breads that went on the table. What was the miracle with them? That they were baked at the beginning of the week and they stayed completely fresh and warm the whole week. Number one. And number two, that when the Kohanim used to eat it, they would eat just a little bit of it and they would get satisfied. Right? And number three, what do we read often in the Chumash about the Mishkan? What was on top of the Mishkan that guided the Jewish people when they should stop, when they should travel? The cloud on top of the Mishkan. He says that's exactly the same 3 miracles that happened in Sarah's tent. The cloud was on Sarah's tent, that's the cloud on the Mishkan. The candle of Shabbos burned from Friday to Friday, that's the same in the Mishkan. The candle of Menorah burnt the whole time. Right? The bracha Metzuya Be'issa, the bracha that extends to the dough, that was a lechem haponim. That's very nice. That's a good comparison. What does it mean to us? It's every home has to have these 3 miracles. First of all, every home has to have the onan kosher al oil. Every home has to have a cloud of the Shekhinah that on top of the home. A home is not a Jewish home unless the Shekhinah, unless the divine presence is hovering on that home. It's a home that makes and is connected to and committed to the divine presence. How do you do that? So first of all, you do that by bringing the spirituality from the world of spirituality into the rest of the week. So we know Shabbos, you light candles. Shabbos is a spiritual time. So we don't physically have this miracle. Most of our candles go out Friday night eventually. But it shouldn't, meaning it goes out physically. But the Neir Dalek, the warmth of Shabbos, which is the spiritual time of the home, has to be felt throughout the week. Right? And it has to be felt throughout the week, not only in the context of the spiritual experiences that we have, but it has to be felt even in the physical experiences we have, which is the bracha Metzuya Be'issa. That's the blessing which is found in the dough. The dough represents the physical stuff that we do. So the candle represents the spirituality of the home. The dough represents the physicality of the home. They are both committed to the Shekhinah, the cloud of the Shekhinah, and that's how a Jewish home operates. Right? And that's how we fulfill our purpose. Purpose is to bring Hashem into this world, to make a home where Hashem could dwell. That's how you make a home where Hashem could dwell, by experiencing these 3 miracles which were in the Mishkan. Where do they come from? They come from the Avos and the Himois. They come from the patriarchs and the matriarchs. They come from the tent which was Sarah's tent, and then eventually became Rivka's tent. Okay. So you can see already the concept of the relation between Yitzchak and Rivka. The story Yitzchak and Rivka is not just a story, it's a story paving the way for the Jewish people. But that doesn't answer the question. What does that specifically have to do with the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, number one? And number two, why specifically the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka? What's unique about the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka? Why not the marriage of Avram and Sarah? Right? I mean, we do read in the Torah that Avram and Sarah got married, but no detail. We know that they were married, but we don't know any detail. The only shirach that we read this amazing detail is Yitzchak and Rivka. What's unique about that marriage? So, in that diary entry, the Rabbi explains the following. I'm just going to open this discourse as well, so we'll refer to it as well. Okay.
Sorry, but even with Leah and Yaakov, there was detail.
But not as much as Yitzchak and Rivka. So Leah and Yaakov, there's detail for other reasons, many, many reasons. I mean, there's a whole formula about Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. Did we just do this recently? No, I did it with... I forget where I say what. But about speech and action. No, I didn't do it yet. I did it somewhere else recently. Okay. Now it's bothering me where I said it. Hey, I'll remember. Okay, I'll work it out. Okay, so let's leave that for now. But let's talk about Yitzchak and Rivka now. So he goes like this. He says he tracks the whole history from Avram, Sarah, till the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka until the end of this Parsha. Says that we know that Avram and Sarah, Kabbalistically, we are taught represents the guf and the neshama, the soul and the body. Right? In other words, the marriage of Avram and Sarah represents the combination between the body and the soul. Avram is the neshama, Sarah is the body. Right? Which, by the way, has to do with the whole masculine, feminine formula generally that we have in Yiddishkeit, where the masculine is drawing down from another source, the spirituality, into the world. The feminine is making it happen in the world, right? That's the concept of Malchus, which we've talked about many, many times. Okay. So Avram and Sarah is the guf and the neshama, the body and the soul. Now, when the body and soul connect, it's a difficult process. The soul is not that interested, as we know, right? The soul doesn't want to come down to the body. As the Pirkei Avos tells us, Bal karchach atacha, you're born against your will. Because the neshama is not interested. The neshama is quite happy where it is. It's basking in the glory of the divine presence and has no need or necessity to come down. Right? So therefore, the very beginning of the story of the Jewish person is the beginning of the story of Avram Avinu, where Hashem says to the neshama, Lech lecha me'artzecha v'ladadcha be'es avicha. Embark on the journey. Go on the journey. Go away from where you are, go from where we're used to, from where you're comfortable, and go down. Right? That's one way to understand, many ways to understand the pasuk of Lech lecha, but this is one of the ways. And Hashem says, I'm sending you down from the highest and loftiest of places to the lowest of places. That's under the journey of Neshama. But I want you to know it's for your benefit. It's not like you're going to suffer as a result, right? Because eventually the Neshama comes to know that serving Hashem in the body is actually far superior and greater and deeper than being next to Hashem without the body. It's more challenging, but it's much, much deeper. So Hashem says, Lech lecha ma'artzecha v'ladadcha, go down, connect to what your real mission is, right? And two things will happen. Number one, it's only when you go down to this world, Lech lecha, that you will really discover your real essence. The neshama will really be able to connect to who the neshama really is at the deepest level. It's only when you go through that process of connecting with the body, right? And second of all, Va'avarechacha, I will bless you, I will make your name great, and the whole thing will be a blessing. You will gain. Which is why the Pirkei Avos says, by the way, that Bal karchach atachai, he doesn't bring us here, but that's a famous thing, that you're born against your will, but you die against your will also. Right? Why does the neshama, how can I have it both ways? Like, the neshama doesn't want to come down, so when Hashem comes to take the neshama, no, it doesn't want to leave. You don't want to leave. You don't want to come in the first place. Now all of a sudden you don't want to leave. Right? Because that's the way it works. Once the neshama comes down, the neshama realizes what kind of amazing opportunity it is to connect to Hashem, dafka through mitzvahs which are physical, dafka through serving Hashem with the challenges of the body, and therefore at the end of the day the neshama doesn't want to leave. Right? And in fact, when the neshama leaves, it's very painful, which is the beginning of the Parshas Chayei. Right? Why? Just have a look at go back to the beginning of the Parsha again. I'll show you a very interesting Kabbalistic interpretation of the second verse. Vatomos Sora. Sora died. I remember, Sora is the body, right? Who is the body? The body is Bekiryas Arba. The body is a physical body that is made up of 4 components: dust, wind, water, and fire. He Chevron, which when it's alive, those 4 components are connected, joined together. Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. What does the land of Canaan mean? You know what the word Canaan means? Transaction. Because while the person's alive, we do business, spiritual business. We transfer ownership from the world outside of holiness into the world of holiness. But Sarah died. In other words, no longer was everything connected. The body starts to decompose and so on and so on. What happens when a person passes away? Vayovoi Avraham. The soul comes, lispoid l'sora v'lifkoisa, to eulogize the body and to cry for it. The neshama goes through a pain. There's a famous thing that I once saw, that when you comfort a mourner, when you comfort a mourner, there's an expression we say, Hamokam yenachem eschem, Hashem should comfort you, right? And we say you in the plural. And there's a whole question: if someone chas v'sholom is sitting shiva alone, single person, what do you say? Do you still say eschem? So some people halachically don't. They say oischo, oisoch. They use the singular. But most people don't. Most people still use the plural. And I once saw an explanation. Why can you say to one person plural? I once saw an explanation because when you comfort a mourner, you're not only comforting the mourner, you're comforting the soul as well. The soul during Shiva also goes through a painful journey, because the soul doesn't want to become disconnected from the body. And that's what the pasuk means. Vatoma Sora passed away. That's the guf, the body, who is the combination of 4 things, Chevron, joined together. And the soul comes to cry and is in pain as well. Now, let's go back to Lech Lecha, or Vayera. Explains what happens like this. When a soul comes down to the body, there's a mission, but the mission happens in 2 stages. When a soul comes down to a body, they are connected. So it's an amazing thing. In other words, it's the combination of the spiritual and the physical, correct? But a person can still be in a body, a person can still live a physical life where the neshama and the body are one, and yet still be detached from the world. Still be very spiritual. Correct? Not involved with the rest of the world. Which is stage 1 of the journey, and in fact it's an important stage. That even when a person is born, the beginning of an education a person is, they should be completely immersed in Kedusha. That's why people grow up, they get to yeshiva, the seminaries, our formative years are not so much involved with the world. We try to be much more immersed in the spiritual world. Even though we're already a physical person, but yet we can be a physical person and still serve Hashem through the body with physical mitzvahs, but still be spiritual. Right? Which is why, at the beginning, Avram's name was Avram, and Sarah's name was Sarai. What does Sarai mean? My princess. Sarah means a princess, Sarai means my princess. Right? What does Avram mean? Without the hay, Avram means Avram, an exalted, lofty father. Referring to Kabbalistic, referring to a very, very high level. In other words, the neshama comes down to the body, but the body initially still only belongs to the soul. The body is not involved in everything else. It's still very much connected to the soul and very spiritual. It's Sarai, it's my princess, the princess exclusively of the soul. Yeah? And Avram is still quite lofty, Avram. And that's the way a person has to begin. That's the way the process works. Avram Avinu goes, he spiritualizes himself, he serves Hashem, passes the test, gets to the level of the bris milah, gets to the middle of the circumcision we explained last week, and Hashem says, okay, it's time to change your name now. Why it's time to change your name? Because when you're on a good footing, when you're firm in your commitment to Hashem as a physical human being, now your mission must expand. Your mission must expand is you cannot live on this planet as a human being and be detached from the rest of the world. Now you've got to give birth. You've got to extend this. You've got to expand this whole concept. Ultimately, the mission of a Jew is not just to serve Hashem in a physical body. Ultimately, the mission of the Jew is not just to live with the physical body and to refine the body and to make sure that the physical human being is in line with the service of Hashem. It's much more than that. Ultimately, the purpose of the Yid that's born with a neshama and a body is to have an impact on the whole world, or at least the person's world. To expand, to interact with the world at large, which is much, much lower than the creation of the Jew, even the physical creation of the Jew. To go into a place which is much more dangerous and bring the highest forms of spirituality into that low form of existence. That's the ultimate purpose, which is the concept of Matan Torah. Right? That's Matan Torah. That's the concept of Matan Torah. Right? And that's why now comes Hashem. Hashem says to Avraham, sorry, now it's time to change your name. Change your name so you'll give birth, you'll expand. Giving birth to Yitzchak. Right? Now how do we see the expansion in the names of Avraham and Yitzchak?
They change at the same time.
Yeah, same time. Avram's name is changed to Avraham. Says Rashi, what does it mean, Avraham? Avraham means Av Hamoin Goyim. You'll become a father to a multitude of nations. Expansion. See expansion in the name? Up to now, Avram, you were an exalted officer, exalted father connected to me. Now I want you to become Avraham. Avraham means Av Hamoin Goyim, a father of multitude of nations. And Sarah will be no longer Sarai, not just my princess, but Sarah, a princess for everyone, a princess for the whole world. How will that expansion be manifested? It will be manifested in the birth of Yitzchak. Why? Because in the birth of Yitzchak, in Yitzchak and the story of Yitzchak, the second stage will be emphasized. How so? And in which part of the story of Yitzchak and Rivka? Which part of the story? The marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. So this is what he says over there in the diary entry. But in the discourse that he said in 1981, he expanded on this point and he said the following. He quoted a fascinating medrash about Eliezer. The medrash says like this. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said the following. There were three people, three tzaddikim throughout history, that they davened to Hashem for something and they had an immediate response when the tefillah was still in their mouth. Who is it? Eliezer, the slave of Avraham Avinu, Moshe, and Shlomo. So Eliezer is now Parsha. It says he was davening to Hashem at the well. Before he finished speaking, Rivka was already out. Moshe Rabbeinu, it says when the Mishkan was built, he davened to Hashem that Hashem should send his divine presence. I mean, the structure was there, but they didn't yet feel the divine revelation. Moshe Rabbeinu davened for that revelation, and it says, "Vayhi kechaloisai." Sorry, it wasn't the Mishkan. Sorry, it was the story of Korach. When Hashem davened that the whole story of Korach should come to an end, and that Korach shouldn't be able to be successful, and that Hashem should show who's right, and that the Torah is true, because the whole Torah was at stake at that time, right? It says, "Vayhi kechaloisai ledaber es kol dvarim la'ila." As soon as Moshe Rabbeinu finished speaking all these things, and the ground opened up, and Korach was born. Shlomo HaMelech was the Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash was built already. The Shekhinah hadn't come down, the fire hadn't come down. Shlomo HaMelech davens. When Shlomo finished davening, immediately, instantaneously, the fire came down. Okay, those are the three things. So the Rebbe, a very interesting thing. What's the significance of it? In other words, in Kabbalah it explains the significance is that it was such a strong tefillah. Because the tefillah was so strong, because it was such an important event, that the tefillah brought about the response in a much more swift way. Sometimes when a person davens, Hashem responds, but the response has to go through the whole process of coming down from the heavens to the earth. There are certain instances in history where the stakes are so high and the concept is so important that Hashem bypasses the whole normal process, and as soon as the person finishes davening, boom, the response is right there. However, he points out a very interesting thing. It's interesting that the Medrash says that there were three tzaddikim who got a response this way. But if you analyze it, they're not exactly the same. By Moshe Rabbeinu and Shlomo, it says when they finished davening, Hashem responded. By Eliezer, it says even before he finished davening. Teren. Right? what's the exact wording? Terem kilo ledaber. Before he finished speaking. In other words, Eliezer's tefillah was even greater than the tefillah of Shlomo and Moshe Rabbeinu. This explains why is that. Because this is the most important part of the Chumash, which also explains why it's told in such great detail. The reason that Yitzchak and Rivka's marriage is told in such detail is because Yitzchak and Rivka's marriage is the ultimate of our mission. Avram Avinu and Sarah is the beginning of the mission, the combination between the neshama and the body, but really the ultimate mission is the expansion to the rest of the world. How do we see that with Yitzchak and Rivka? So Avram and Sarah got married, correct? We've read it in the Chumash. Avram and Sarah came from a similar family. One represents the soul, one represents the body. Yes, the journey for the soul and the body is a long journey and it's a hard journey, but we don't see such an unbelievable gap between Avram and Sarah. They're not so vastly different. They came from a similar background. When it came to Yitzchak and Rivka, we see this idea of the highest of Kedusha transforming the lowest of the world, which is the concept of expansion, going much further than just the body. How so? First of all, Yitzchak represented holiness even more than Avram Avinu. Yitzchak was born in the land of Israel. Right? Yitzchak went to the Akedah. When he went to the Akedah, he reached the highest, loftiest levels of holiness. So much so that Hashem said he's now considered an oilah tamimo, he's now considered a sacrifice, that he's not permitted to go out of the land of Israel. Yitzchak was a person that never left the land of Israel. Ultimate spirituality. Correct? More than Avraham Avinu, more than Yaakov even in a way. Yeah? And Avraham Avinu sends Eliezer, because he can't send Yitzchak, to go get a shidduch. Where does the shidduch come from? Outside of Israel. Outside of holiness. Who was it? Rivka. Where did Rivka come from? The lowest of the low. She was called Shoshana ben Achochim. She was a thorn. Sorry, she was a rose among the thorns. Her family was the most immoral family. The society that she lived in was the most immoral society. And she was plucked out of there. Yitzchak buries her, and together they create a Jewish home. In other words, Rivka represents the ability that the neshama, combining with the body, has the potential not just to live a life connected to Hashem, but to transform a much wider radius of lowliness into Kedusha. And that's why Yitzchak and Rivka's shidduch is so important. That's why Eliezer's tefillah is the strongest tefillah in the Torah. That even before he finished davening, even more than Moshe Rabbeinu and Eliezer. Why? Because what happens to the forefathers happens to us. Yitzchak and Rivka, Avraham and Sarah, is the beginning of our journey. It's the neshama coming down to the body. It's the beginning of how we live as a Jew, how we serve Hashem through a body, but still insular, still distance from the world. Yitzchak and Rivka is Matan Torah full blown. It's about Hashem coming into the world. It's about us extending and expanding our interaction, not just to interact with a body, to have a good body that's behaving itself even though it's physical, but a body that can actually be like Rivka, with the help of the highest levels of Kedusha from Yitzchak, and expand into the world and elevate that world. And that's why the Nesuin, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, is not just a story of a shidduch. It's a story of the mission of the Jewish people. The mission of the Jewish people, which then played out in the giving of the Torah. It played out in the giving of the building of the Mishkan with the 3 miracles in the Mishkan, similar to the 3 miracles in Sarah's tent. And it plays out with us specifically. Why? So he explains in that discourse, he says, because it plays out specifically in Golus. Because it's not just for nothing that the Yidden, after being in Eretz Yisrael, went into Golus, because this concept of expansion extends way beyond Matan Torah. Matan Torah at the end of the day was Har Sinai. The Yidden then go into Eretz Yisrael and have a Beis HaMikdash. Where does the ultimate expansion take place, spiritually speaking? When we go into Golus. Even though on a superficial level we went into Golus because of our sins, but actually in Kabbalah it says the reason we went into Golus ultimately is to elevate the entire world, to gather the sparks of Kedusha of the entire world and bring them all back and make the entire world a place that Hashem can dwell in. That's the ultimate expansion. Like Yitzchak and Rivka, where was Rivka taken from? Outside of Eretz Yisrael. Where did Eliezer go to get her? Outside of Eretz Yisrael. And then combine the ultimate Kedusha Yitzchak with the ultimate of outside of Eretz Yisrael. And that's the mission of the Jewish people, and that's why it's such detail, and that's why it's the destination of Am Yisrael. Okay?
So, thing happened with Yaakov should be also.
Yeah. So Yaakov plays it out even more in a way. Yeah. So Yaakov is also Yud Akev. So Yaakov is again, it's a continuation of what Yitzchak. Yitzchak starts it and then Yaakov continues it.
Yeah, but was it repeated twice just because it's important, or do you get something different in the second?
I'm sure both are true. But the explanation that's given always is that it's repeated twice just to show how important it is, just to show that it's not just a story. It's really the journey of the Jewish person.